The left is trying to use power to dominate the terrain of discussion.
What exactly is your interpretation of the line for cancel culture versus just holding somebody accountable? Say the difference between Colin Kaepernick no longer playing NFL because America is so oppressive, he makes millions, and the guy James Damore, who was fired from Google because he sent out a memo saying men and women are biologically different. Where is the line, and when does it become canceling? When is it just holding someone accountable? When is it being sensitive? When is it just having preferences?
Look, that's a great question, and it's a subtle and nuanced question. My view as a general matter, we should not have people being fired for expressing their political views. Now there are exceptions to that, and one of the exceptions is we have a right as consumers. So you mentioned Colin Kaepernick. I don't like what Kaepernick said. Now, I don't think he should be censored. I don't think he should be silenced. But I'm not interested in supporting him with his message of that to me is disrespecting the American flag and is disrespecting the men and women who fought to defend the flag in our nation. I don't think it's right that Kaepernick is not a quarterback today because of his stance. To be honest, his stance was embraced in the NFL because they're such leftists, they loved it, and the guy is making tens of millions of dollars from Nike right now. He's not a quarterback because he wasn't that good a quarterback, and he had a tryout that was lousy. I will say, by the way, it is clearly political discrimination that I'm not an NFL quarterback. They don't like my views, and it's the only reason I'm not a starting quarterback.
It's cancel culture, if you ask me. Coincidentally, I did just write a book on this very subject called Speechless, Controlling Words, Controlling Minds. So I appreciate, thank you. That's very kind. Thank you. Since, we're selling the Cactus merch, so I might as well mention this book. And I think your question is really important, and Senator, you make a good point here, which is it's a subtle and nuanced question. I don't think that we as conservatives are saying we have no standards at all whatsoever. William F. Buckley Jr., when he launched the modern conservative movement, he did so with a book called God and Man at Yale, The Superstitions of Academic Freedom, in which he mocked this extreme idea of academic freedom that the left pretends to embrace, but they don't even really embrace. I don't think anyone believes that if you go to your water cooler and you make a Zig Heil and you start reciting Mein Kampf, that when you lose your job, that is cancel culture and we're all supposed to cry about that. No, obviously, societies have limits. There is going to be decorum. The left tries to shut us up on certain things and says you can't say certain things. Chivalry also suggests maybe you shouldn't say certain things. And so the questions involved are, one, what should the government be involved in? That's a procedural question. And then two, a substantive question. What is the good? What do we want to have in our society? What do we want to look up to? What do we want to pursue? And what is really going to make us free people? That distinction that our founding fathers found so important between liberty, true liberty, and licentiousness, just pursuing your basest passions. And so I agree with what you brought up and obviously what you said, Senator, that we need to take this question in a much more serious way, and if that means we can't dunk on the libs quite as much, so be it. But we want to be able to move forward into a society that has a culture that we can all really be proud of and live in.
Well, and let me give an example of the line drawing, because I don't think it's binary. State of Tennessee has actually a state law that, as I understand it, requires the governor every year to proclaim a Nathan Bedford Forrest Day, celebrating Nathan Bedford Forrest, and the governor a couple of years ago did that. I saw that and publicly said this is a mistake and you shouldn't do it. Now, for those of you who don't know who Nathan Bedford Forrest was, he was a Civil War general, but he was also a slave trader, and he was the founder of the Ku Klux Klan. And I said, this is absurd that we are celebrating this man. The Ku Klux Klan is a force for evil, and we should not be celebrating him. Some folks came back and said, well, Cruz, you're being unrealistic because state law requires a proclamation about him. I said, all right, If I were governor of Tennessee, you want to see a proclamation about him? I'll make a proclamation you'll never forget about someone who built his entire fortune selling other human beings. Now, there's a difference, I think, between not honoring the founder of the Ku Klux Klan and tearing down a statue of Thomas Jefferson. And part of it requires the exercise of judgment. It's not a clean, narrow line that we should never express a view, or we should always silence views. It is somewhere in between. But the left, the thing to understand about cancel culture is the left is trying to use power to dominate the terrain of discussion. So I remember last summer, 2 summers ago, I was in California. Heidi's family's from California. We were visiting with a friend of the family who's a kindergarten teacher. And she said, look, I'm scared to speak. There's a McCarthyist wind in the air that if I say the wrong thing at school, I'm fired and my job is lost. And there are a lot of people that feel frightened to speak because the left is so unrelenting. And so I think we ought to have a lot of tolerance. We can draw lines at the extreme, but we ought to have a lot of tolerance for a reasoned discourse and debate, and that includes a reasoned discourse about our history, which is neither uniformly good nor uniformly bad, and we ought to be able to discuss that intelligently.